Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this episode, We're going back to April 22nd, 1997. On that day, Mary J. Blige would release her third studio album entitled Share My World. And we're going to talk about it. This album is actually turning 25 years old. Now, I don't know about you, but it's kind of hard for me to believe that this album is turning 25 because I distinctly remember like what was going on. I was outside when this album came out, and it's just amazing when you think about it. On this podcast, I'm going to talk about the album, obviously, the production, get into the tracks. But first, let's go back, man. April 22nd, 1997. The musical landscape was different from what you might imagine in 1997. Around this time, obviously, hip hop pretty much has a stranglehold on the music industry. Um, if you didn't have a hot rapper rapping over your R&B track, you probably weren't getting any airplay as an R&B artist. But then there were, a few like Mary J. Blige who, you know, she didn't have to go by the cookie cutter ideas or values that the industry had set. She was a trendsetter in and of herself. And with this being her third studio album, the biggest question was, could she keep it up? And what I mean by that is, if you're familiar with Mary J. Blige's story, you know that her first album, What's the 411? She killed it. She was dubbed the Queen of Hip Hop Soul. And then on her second album, my personal favorite album of the 90s, My Life, Out of Here, right? So she's riding the wave. She beat the sophomore jinx, and now critics are wondering, can she do it a third time? Will the third time be a charm? Well, you better believe she did. um, yeah, it was different, man. Again, this album came out at a time where hip hop pretty much dominated the charts. And Mary wasn't one who was going to, let anything or anybody define her or what her music should look or feel or sound like. I think one of the things that makes Mary J. Blige resonate so well with her fans and admirers is because people, male or female, can relate to her music. And she just pours her soul into her music. And this album was no different. Again, released April 22nd, 1997. The album runtime is a little bit over an hour, 65 minutes. And I mean, she pulled out some heavy hitters as far as this album was concerned. And we'll talk about the production in just a second. But this album was, I want to say it sold like 240,000 copies. And that's hard copies, folks. Kids, we actually had to go actually out of our house to go purchase this album. There was no internet. There was no, touching your iPad and downloading it. But yeah, 240,000 copies in the first week sales, which was incredible. It had actually knocked off Biggie's Life After Death, which came out, I think, a couple of weeks, like 5 weeks prior to, and it had been number one, obviously, on the heels of Biggie's passing. But yeah, this album was incredible. Share My World went on to, I want to say this album went triple platinum, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, highly loved and worldwide. She had fans from everywhere that was buying this album, and it was critically reviewed. It pretty much got a lot of love as far as the critics were concerned as well. Um, and I'll be honest, for her to put out an album after What's the 411 and then follow it up with an album like My Life. Um, it was tough. It was tough. And I mean, like, there were a lot of people, myself included, who didn't know what to expect. Um, because it really wasn't much of a rollout, if you will. The first single that was released was a track called Love Is All We Need. That came out before the album came out. Um, that single was released March 18th, 1997. So roughly about a month before the album comes out, and then obviously that song features Nas. But everything else, I mean, like, we didn't know what to expect, and I'll be honest, I was pleasantly surprised when I heard this album. Um, because not only because it was a dope album, but being honest, I mean, I'm a huge Mary J Blige fan, right? So, so she would have had to have just really bombed out for me to be um, disappointed in this album. But she came back to the drawing board and knocked out a banger. And what a lot of people don't know is that she served as the executive producer. She had a lot of producers on this album, but she had the final say as to what went on the album, which she didn't have as much control over the first two albums. And again, she lined up some heavy hitters. So yeah, let's get into the production. This album was produced by some of the best producers in the music industry. Um, Everyone from Tone and Polk, aka the Trackmasters, Rodney Jerkins, um, Fly Time Zone, Jimmy Jam, and Terry Lewis. Um, you had Babyface produce a couple of tracks. Bryce Wilson from Groove Theory, um, George Goldenfingers Pearson. Wasn't really familiar with his music, but he got on a couple of joints on here. Um, James Mtume, the late great James Mtume, and you know, old boy, old boy from Chicago. Uh, the dude who told you he believed he could fly. I'm not gonna mention his name, but y'all know who I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't give him no love, but I got to give him his props. He put a joint on her album as well. So she had some great producers, and she wrote a lot on this album. Um, and I think one of the things that really stood out to me was just how the album flowed. Like, it was very melodic. Um, she didn't have a lot of fast or upbeat tracks, but the album doesn't feel sad or somber. Um, you can make a case that My Life is a very dark album. She, admitted in interviews in the past that, that was like one of the darkest times in her life. Um, but she's got some mid-tempo joints on here. She's got some slow joints on here. She's got some, pour your heart out, Mary J. Blige type joints on here. And it all fits. It just all fits, in my opinion. Um, Again, an incredible album with some incredible producers. Um, I'll be honest. I mean, like, again, I didn't know what to expect, but once I heard it, I was hooked. I remember when I bought this album, I bought the CD, and I was I was I here yet? No, I wasn't in Atlanta yet. I was still in I just graduated from college from South Carolina State University. So I was still in Orangeburg, South Carolina, preparing to move to Atlanta. And I remember I bought the CD the first day that it came out. And I mean, like, I just remember standing in line, and there was two young ladies in front of me, and they were arguing about, like, who was going to take the CD home. I guess they rode there together or whatever. And you know, they lived in separate places, and she was like, well, no, I need to get a copy. I'm going to take it home, and you like, they were going back and forth, and I'm like, why don't y'all just buy 2 CDs? But keep in mind now, they were probably broke college students, just like I was, even though I had already graduated. But you know, and CDs cost back then. I mean, like that CD, I want to say was like $10 or $11. That was a lot of money back in the day. But we had invested so much into the music, and we invested so much into the artist that we weren't gonna have steps. So if you put your money into an artist, um, you wanted them to deliver, and Mary J. Blige definitely delivered on this album. Um, this album, for what it's worth, won some awards. I won the uh, American Music Award for Favorite Soul R&B Album. It was nominated for Favorite Soul R&B Female Artist. Um, she was also nominated for Best R&B Album for the Grammys. Nominated for a couple of Soul Train Music Awards, and she did win the Lady of Soul Soul Train Music Award for Best R&B Album. Um, and Mary J. Blige was also nominated for Outstanding Female Artist back then on the strength of this album. Again, the album runtime is 65 minutes. And you know what? When you think about it, especially now, like when I listen to music, a lot of times I will look and see how long an album is. And to be honest, sometimes that will determine how much I'm going to listen to it, or if I'm going to listen to it at all. Because now music is so fragmented, and you got your standards. You got to have your club song, you got to have for the homies song, and you got to have for the ladies songs. And it's whack. But the thing is that I think this was, in a lot of ways, one of the dying uh, albums that helped that last dying era of R&B. R&B as we know it today is totally different from R&B back in 1997. And while she has some, jazz influence on here, she has some hip hop influence, obviously. There's some gospel influence on here. Um, you know, eh, this is still a nice soul R&B album. And she was going through a lot at the time. It's well documented, but she was, I don't know if she was ever treated for depression, but she was going through depression. Um, she was battling a drug and alcohol addiction, and she had a very, very bad and turbulent relationship with Casey Haley, Casey from the group Jodeci. So she was going through a lot, and as successful as the My Life album was, Share My World was a pivot. Um, it saw us see a different side of Mary, maybe a little bit more uh, melancholy, maybe a little bit more happier side of Mary, and I loved it. I loved it from start to finish. Um, so let's get into the tracks, man. The album starts off with the intro, which you heard at the beginning of the podcast. Um, I like the way they put that in there. I like, old dirty bastard, rest in peace. At the awards, presenting her with the award. But I thought that was dope. That was a pretty dope intro. Then we go into track number 2, I Can Love You, featuring Little Kim. Um, man, listen. This joint was produced by Rodney Jerkins. Um, One of the standout tracks on the album. There was a video for it. Um, man, listen, when this joint came out, all the ladies knew this song. Not some, not a few, not a handful, but all the ladies knew this song. Fellas, if you have someone or a woman in your life that was around or outside in 1997, ask her if she knows the words to I Can Love You. I can promise you that she does, because this was like the anthem. And it was little Kim was in a video, and it was good seeing Kim, on the heels of Biggie's death. And, because we had seen some lasting images of, Kim at Biggie's funeral, and she was just, crying, and she needed to be comforted. And who was right there by her side? Mary J. Blige. So, it was good to see them together, smiling and having a good time in this video. But the song is dope. One of my favorite tracks. It's probably my second favorite track on the album. I Can Love You by Mary J. Blige featuring Lil' Kim. Then we go to the third track, which was the lead single, which was Love Is All We Need, featuring Nas. And again, this was produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Another dope up-tempo track. And I think this is cool because Mary J is really starting you off with two bangers, and she's using, two big hip hop stars in the mix to rap over it. And of course, Nas comes through with smooth out raps. And, this is just a joint, man. This is a joint. It's a feel good joint. And I just remember hearing it for the first time. And when I looked at the liner notes, and I was like, oh shit, Nas is on here. So I was amped because that's my dude, right? So, but yeah, another phenomenal song. Then we go to track 4, Round and Round, produced by the Trackmasters Tone and Poke. Another one. This was another mid-tempo joint. Mary's starting us off, in a different kind of vibe. My Life was, a little bit slower, a little bit darker. Of course, What's the 411? This kind of gave you that kind of vibe, but it was different because she was older and she had experienced more. And she was letting you in on what was going on with her. And again, it doesn't have the dark feeling of My Life, but it's such a smooth ass transition and such a smooth ass album that you can't help but bop to it. But Round and Round, I like too. I liked that song as well. Then we moved to track 5, which was the Share My World interlude. And then track 6, Share My World, the title track, produced by Rodney Jerkins. Listen, this is my joint. The thing about this track that always stood out to me was like, I really could see a world where this song could be on either What's the 411 or My Life. It is so dope, but it is so great to listen to. It's vintage Mary J. Blige. And this song is, I think this song is, no, it's not the longest song. It's one of the longer songs on this album, but it doesn't even feel like it because it's just like, it's a feel good song. I'm lost for words, but it's a feel good song. I love listening to it. I never get tired of listening to the title track, Share My World. Then we move to track 7, aptly entitled 7 Days, featuring George Benson, the legendary George Benson. This track was produced by Malik Pendleton. Another good joint. She's coming back after back after back. Track after track after track, and they're all back to back. And it's like I'm rolling. 7 Days. I'll be honest. The first couple of times that I heard it, I didn't really catch it like that. Like I wasn't really feeling it like that. Not that it bothered me. I was just like, okay, this is cool. But the more and more I listened to it, I was like, oh, now I see what's going on. And another one. It was another track just that, really kind of took it there. And for her to have George Benson on it says a lot. And then we moved to track 8. It's On, produced by Old Boy. Okay. If I transport myself into 1997, right? I go back to, I jump in the time machine and I go back to 1997, and it's 25 years ago, and I'm listening to this. I'm playing it because it's on is produced by Old Boy. And Old Boy at the time, there was nobody better in R&B than him. And I mean, personal stuff aside, Old Boy is one of the greatest people in R&B music, period. I can't deny that. Never mind the fact that I think he's a piece of shit. But this song is it hits. However, in 2022, because he appears on the song and his voice is on the song, I don't listen to it. That's just a personal choice because I don't listen to any of his music or anything that he is singing on. So when I listen to this album now, I skip it. I don't skip it because it's a bad song. I don't skip it because it's whack. I don't skip it because Mary J messed up. I skip it simply because Old Boy is on the track. And I have my own beef with Old Boy. And I've had this beef for a long time with Old Boy. So, and it's well documented. So it's just me. But if you want to listen to it, cool. I personally won't listen to it. And again, that's why I skipped the track. But if you take it back to 1997, it's a good track. Then we move to track 9, Thank You, Lord, which is an interlude produced by Rodney Jerkins. And then we move to track 10, Missing You, produced by Babyface. Okay. This is where it gets interesting to me because I want to say up until this point, with the exception of the track that Old Boy is on, you really can't tell who produced without looking at the liner notes. You really can't tell who produced any of these tracks. For me, when I get to track 10, I automatically know who produced this track because it sounds like a Babyface track. I don't think that's a knock, but like, as much as I love his music, I think some of his tracks, particularly the ones that he produces for other people, tend to sound the same. So when I heard Missing You, I'm like, oh, okay, this is the thing. And it's not a bad song. It's actually a pretty good song, I guess. But I was like, the whole time that I was listening to it, I was like, it sounds like something. And I couldn't put my finger on it. And I couldn't put my finger on it. But Missing You is not a bad track. Again, it's not a bad track. It's not, even to this point, for me, it's not even a skippable track, but it's a Babyface track that sounds very familiar. Right? And then we get to track 11. Everything. Whoo! Listen. Produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. This is my joint of my joints of my joints. This joint bangs. What can I say about this? I mean, like, of course, where it was taken from, where it's sampled or what have you. But I never get tired of hearing this song. Never. It's probably, you know what? I take that back. It's probably a tie with I Can Love You for my second favorite. Those two probably my number 2 tracks. But I love this joint, man. I love this joint. This joint, did appear on a couple of Slow Jams, Get the Draws mixtapes that I made. But yeah, it goes, it bangs. And again, I mean, you can't go wrong with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis at all. Then we get to track 12, Keep Your Head. This one was produced by Tone and Pope, the Trackmasters, and George Goldenfingers Pearson. This one was okay. I'll put it like this. I like this track and the placement of where it was a lot more in 1997 than I do today. Today, I'd probably take this track off the album. And it's not that it's a bad track, but it's just like, mm, I don't know if it necessarily fits right here. I personally think it kind of breaks up the flow of the album a little. Um, because we had gone, kind of up tempo, then we slow things down a little bit. Then you got your everything. And so if you have a banger like everything, you got to follow it up with something that's banging too. And keep your head just don't bang. However, track 13, I think should have been track 12. And that is Can't Get You Off My Mind featuring the Locks. I thought this was dope for Mary J to go back to Yonkers, where she's from, and bring in the boys from the Locks. Man, listen, and this was produced by Rodney Jerkins as well. I love this joint. I love this joint. The Locks give you a nice kind of smoothed out rhymes. They're not killing you over the head or anything like that. Nice verses, and their raps fit along with what Mary J is singing about. So it's dope, man. I mean, of course, I think Kiss had the best verse, but it was dope, and I think this song really would have benefited as a banger to follow up behind everything. Keep Your Head again probably could have been taken off the album. Next up, track 14, Get to Know You Better, by that was produced by Bryce Wilson from Groove Theory. I like this joint. Kind of mellowed a little bit, so it's up and down, and I'm feeling it. Again, another vintage Mary J Blige joint where she's pouring out her heart. I mean, you can't be mad at that. Can't be mad at that at all. Next track. Track 15, Searching, featuring Roy Ayers. This is my favorite track on the album, produced by Rodney Jerkins. Man, when I say banger, this is a banger. It's vintage. It's like a combination of What's the 411 and My Life mixed in with a little bit of Share My World. It's giving you that hip hop feel. And then, I mean, Roy Ayers on the vibraphone. Come on, man. I mean, Roy Ayers is a legend in and of itself. He's one of the most sampled people in hip hop. One of the most sampled artists. Hip hop artists have sampled his music, I should say. But man, listen, my favorite joint. Never get tired of hearing it. It is vintage Mary J Blige. And again, I mean, you just got to listen to it. This is a joint that, like, I found, particularly over the years as I listened to it, because I still listen to this album, right? I found that the more that I listen to this album, every time I get to track 15, repeat. It's got to be repeated at least twice, because it's that much of a banger. It's my favorite track on the album. The next track, Our Love, produced by the late great James Mtume. This one kind of reminds me of My Life, and I'm cool with this. I think this track would have been a very good finisher for the album. It's not the last track on the album, but I think it would have been a great finisher for the album. But all in all, I think it's a good track. I think it's a pretty good closeout to the album. And if there's one mistake that I think is on this album, it is track 17. Unpopular opinion, I don't like this track. And that track is Not Gonna Cry, produced by Babyface. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I don't like this song. I don't like this song. For one, keep in mind, this song was already out, right? This song was on the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack. Well, here's the problem. The Waiting to Exhale soundtrack came out in 1996. This album came out in 1997. So with all of the radio play that Not Gonna Cry got, which I thought was over the top, but I grew very tired of that song very quickly. And I say it's an unpopular opinion because I know that it's very popular with women. More particular, it was very popular with the women at my school because every time you were walking down the street, you would hear this blasting from a Honda Civic. I'm just not a fan of the song, and it's a decent song. I just got tired of this song very quickly, and so for it to be on the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack, okay, cool, you got that. I'm gonna let you rock out with that. But then you put it on the Share My World album, and it's the last track. Nah, player, you don't have to do that. Why are we doing this? Why, Babyface? Why? And then speaking of Babyface, remember earlier in the podcast when I told you that Missing You sounded like something familiar? Well, to me, Missing You sounds a lot like Not Gonna Cry. Both songs are produced by Kenneth Babyface Edmonds. And so my thing is this. If you're going to give me Missing You, we definitely don't need Not Gonna Cry at the end of the album. I'm sorry. It's not necessary. They should have left this off off the album. I think it's the one blemish. I mentioned earlier about songs I could take off or what they could have done to rearrange it. I'm still rolling with this album, right? But Not Gonna Cry shouldn't have been on this album because again, by the time it gets released on the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack and it gets major airplay, the video's out, the whole nine, and then you're going to throw it on as a filler track or whatever for the Share My World album. It's not necessary. It's really not necessary. I could have done without this. I could have done without Missing You. Keep Your Head to the Sky. We could have moved it around somewhere, but that's the only blemish. That's the only knocks that I have on this album. And again, it doesn't make it a bad album because I still think this album is phenomenal, but it knocks it down a peg. And I don't know if maybe they were trying to do Babyface a solid because these are the only two tracks that Babyface produced that end up on the album, Missing You and Not Gonna Cry. And I understand Not Gonna Cry was a smash, but it had already smashed on the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack. No need to let it smash on Share My World. But yeah, when I do hip hop reviews, at the end of the review, we always talk about how many mics we would give it. We normally don't do that for R&B albums, but I'm going to give you my mic rating for this album. This is a 4 mic album. If you take Not Gonna Cry off of it and Missing You, we might be talking about 4.5 or something. But crazy album. I still listen to it to this day. It bangs from top to bottom. If you have not listened to this album anytime recently, do yourself a favor and go back and listen to it because it's got some smokers on here. Not just the songs that I say that I like, but it is a great listen all the way through. Again, it's hard to believe that this album is turning 25. Where did the time go? But as I mentioned on a previous podcast, with What's the 411, My Life, and then Share My World, those first 3 albums, that 3-album run by Mary J Blige was crazy. And this piece right here was, it solidified her. Not that she needed any other proof, but this solidified her as one of the greats, if you will. And again, an incredible album from top to bottom. Make sure that you go back and take a listen to it after you finish this podcast. Again, April 22nd, 1997, Share My World. This album turns 25. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Make sure that you check out this podcast and subscribe to this podcast because the podcast drops every Thursday at midnight. Be sure to subscribe because from time to time we will drop bonus episodes on Sundays at midnight. Make sure you check out the link tree with all of the links to all social media accounts as well as YouTube as well. That's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy, 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 Gs.